is Digital Marketing Depot, broadcasting live. I'm Karen Burka, your webinar producer. Thank you for joining us today for a Tag Auditing Platform Buyer's Guide, Best Practices for Tag Management and Governance. We are very pleased to welcome Brad Prenger, Vice President of Partnerships at InfoTrust, and Lucas Long, Product Manager for Tag Inspector. Now, before I turn the webinar over to our speakers, I want to tell you all a few things. If you need some help or have a question for our speakers, just use the Q&A box and we will do our best to help you. If you want to tell a friend, check out our sponsor, InfoTrust, or Digital Marketing Depot. There are some widgets at the bottom of your screen. Just click on them and they will take you where you want to go. Remember that you can customize your audience console to move or resize any windows that you have open. Now, with that business taken care of, let me make some more formal introductions. With over 12 years of experience in digital media, e-commerce, and analytics, Brad Prenger works with large enterprises to leverage their data and achieve their business goals. Lucas Long provides tag management and data governance best practices to companies across the globe from InfoTrust's Barcelona office. Audience, you can see more complete bios and contact information for our speakers on the left side of your console. Remember, if you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Q&A box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentations. So before I turn the webinar over to Lucas to get us started, I've got a question for you. We want to get a sense, before we launch into the formal remarks, of how good a handle you have on the number of tags on your website. So here's the question. Be honest. How many tags are currently present on your primary website? Now, we want you to choose one of these answers, and we've got a few choices for you. Is it 1 to 12, 13 to 25, 26 to 40, more than 40, or maybe you really have no clue? And be honest if that's the case. So I know you have to do a little number crunching in your head to think about that. While you do that, I want to remind all of you that we are going to hear a lot of great content today. So we will be recording this broadcast and make it available for viewing on demand this afternoon. I'm going to send an email out when it's ready. So take a look for that later today in case you want to go back over some of the great comments that Lucas and Brad are going to have for us today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the results, and I'm going to bring Lucas in to take a look at them with me. So Lucas, let's go ahead down here. 40 plus seems to be our winner, although we've got about 25% who think that there are 12 or fewer, and about 17% of our audience are being brutally honest and say they have no clue. Lucas, is this typical of what you hear when you're out talking to marketers?
It is a pretty even distribution. I think a lot of those in the 1 to 12 buckets might be thinking a little bit optimistically, but hopefully that truly is the case. 40 plus, you've definitely come to the right place to learn a little bit more about some best practices to get a hold of all of those.
Great. Well, let's go ahead to the agenda slide and get you started.
Thank you, Karen. So thanks everyone again for joining. Just to give you a quick overview of kind of how we'll be going through this today. I want to kick it off with overview of just the ever-changing landscape of data management, tagging, data collection on websites. We'll take a look at some of the changes over time. We'll discuss a little bit why you need a tag governance policy, which is going to become really apparent and is pretty apparent from that original poll question as well. At that point, we will go through some of the common challenges that organizations see as they're trying to implement a tag policy and tag governance and tag monitoring solutions. So how to change the conversation with leadership, identifying the right partner when it comes to a tag auditing platform, a tag monitoring platform, and then some tips and best practices for implementing a tag auditing and monitoring platform. At that point, we'll take all of your questions and hopefully get some really good answers. So to start it off, just to explore a little bit of the history of the landscape of data management, tagging, data collection across websites. So the modern internet with tracking of traffic started there around the mid-90s. One of the original analytics platforms was the Urchin platform, which started in 1998. At that point, it was just pixel tracking. So Nothing really dynamic happening there. We were counting how many visitors and page views were happening across websites. Through the years, analytics became much more robust. Google Analytics got into the game around 2009. Adobe purchased the Omniture platform in 2009. Google Analytics was introduced, in 2005. And that's where like the JavaScript tracking really came into play. A lot more events, a lot more actions being tracked, and then a lot more platforms. I know a lot of people are familiar with the marketing technology graphic and how everything has really exploded over the past 10, 15 years, and that's extremely true in the tagging, in the data collection space on websites. One of the big things that has really exploded that whole space was the introduction of tag management systems around the early 2010s. Some of the timing around there, Telium was introduced around 2008, Insight around 2009, V1 of Google Tag Manager around 2012. With the promise of tag management systems being the democratization of the deployment of tags, the implementation of new technologies, and the ease of collecting data across a website. With that, though, we have seen an explosion in the number of technologies being introduced on websites. Piggybacking that's happening, so a lot of unauthorized tags that can now load through the JavaScript of other platforms, and really just a lot of chaos and uncertainty when it comes to websites. We say it's kind of like the Wild West out there. So in 2018, we're starting to see many more organizations understand the importance and the need for responsibility when it comes to tagging. Now, I wanted to provide just an example, and this is just looking at one website that we've scanned on a weekly basis since 2014. So in 2014, there were 13 different marketing tags that were present on this particular website. As you can see in this hierarchy graphic, most are loading directly from the page source, very little piggybacking activity going on. 2015, we see 34 different unique platforms loading on this site. Still, most tags loading directly from the page source. We do see the introduction of a tag management system. We're starting to see some piggybacking when it comes to some of the media tags. 2016, 53 tags present on this website. A lot more piggybacking, a lot more media platforms that are being deployed, and several levels when it comes to that hierarchy or that loading behavior. 2017 is starting to get a little bit out of control. We're looking at 60 tags, a lot of piggybacking, and a lot of really heavy piggybacking, which, when we're seeing 7, 10, 15 platforms that are loading through other third parties. We took a look at the website this year in 2018, 164 tags that are present and loading when a user is accessing this website. As you can see here, a ton of piggybacking behavior, a lot of third parties. And this is what we're seeing across everywhere. All industries, all different types of websites, all different types of audiences. The introduction of a lot of things that seem to make just different actions on the website much easier. One of the examples that you can see here in this 2018 graphic is the platform Add This, which is a social sharing widget that is introduced on a website. And we see that with just easy plugins like that are really piggybacking, loading in a lot of different third parties. And it really highlights the need for governance. It's becoming out of control. So to touch on governance a little bit, just to go through kind of a tag governance policy, what it means, why you need it. So as mentioned, with this proliferation of technologies that are loading on sites, some known, some unknown to the actual website owner, it matters. It's not just a scary-looking graphic. Really 3 different areas where tag governance comes into play and becomes a really big need for an organization. The first one being privacy and compliance. Users in today's environment expect their data to be protected. They expect that information that they give to you, or even their behavior of what is happening on their website, is restricted to you and trusted partners, not some completely unauthorized, unknown platform out there that who knows exactly what that platform is doing with their information. That's really been codified and is now legally protected under things such as GDPR, the e-privacy regulations that are being worked on within Europe, different types of industry regulations depending upon the audience that you're serving. Children are on the website being covered under particular regulations, HIPAA, financial regulations, all of those things protecting the privacy legally of the users and the visitors of your website. In addition to privacy and compliance, which hopefully would be enough to avoid some of those massive fines, just data collection and analytics. So you have a massive investment in media, in driving users to the website. One of the big buzzwords and keys for organizations over the past few years has been data-driven marketing and really relying on the data that's collected to drive business decisions. Data collection becomes much more difficult and really just more difficult, both for implementation as well as some of the timing aspects and discrepancy issues that you will see as the overall number of platforms and third parties begin to load on the website. So getting control of data governance and tag governance in that context really matters. And then finally, site performance. Individual tags on a one-off basis typically are not going to have any impact on your site performance. But in aggregate, if you have 30, 40, 50 different platforms that are piggybacking and loading in, it can really slow down your site and really negatively impact user experience. We've all seen the metrics. 1 second of additional latency can reduce conversions by 8 to 10%. If you're doing everything right, your IT folks are doing everything right when it comes to performance and optimization of the website, but marketing is slowing it down. It's the complete opposite of the true function of that section of the organization. That's why the tag governance is important. What is tag governance? What are we talking about here? So really it breaks down into four different areas. So first is just a global tag policy. So understanding what, based upon those different compliance, privacy regulations, as well as the internal legal restrictions that you have to follow for your organization, what are the allowed, not allowed, and required platforms, high level, that should be on your site? Understanding that, understanding what are the approved vendors, what data can and should be collected is really what goes into that global tag policy. Beyond that, you need to understand and establish a structure. So what are the different roles within the organization? Who owns different platforms? How should things be structured on the website? All of that goes into establishing that structure. It's really the policies and the processes around tag management and implementation, as well as ongoing monitoring and QA. It's critical as a part of any tag governance policy. The next area is around processes and compliance. So how are you going to, once you have everything architected and you understand what the policy is, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what is the process in order to ensure compliance with that policy on an ongoing basis? And this includes different aspects of the governance process, such as tag implementation process, ensuring that there's a good review, QA, and testing around implementation, as well as ongoing monitoring. Which, speaking of ongoing monitoring, and one of the items that we're really touching on today with that monitoring is how to really automate and how to really be proactive in that monitoring approach. One, making sure that there's no unauthorized tags that show up, as well as being able to identify, spot, and respond to any data collection issues or performance issues on an ongoing basis. How do we ensure that our policies and our processes are being followed? And then how do we ensure that we're maintaining a solid tag governance policy on an ongoing basis? And how can we do that in an automated fashion in order to be able to reduce the amount of effort that it's going to take our internal teams to put forth for that? So now that we know the different areas and pieces here of a good tag management process and a good tag management policy, I'm going to pass it back over to Karen so she can ask a question to see where everyone stands within that process.
Thanks so much, Lucas. That was some great information. And audience, look at the number of those tags that InfoTrust has seen. So really does make you think twice about how many tags you might be managing on your website. So let's take a look now at tag governance, and we're going to get more into that with Brad's part of the presentation in a couple of minutes. So we just wanted to understand a little better where you all are in terms of your tag governance practices at your company. Now with this question, you can choose more than one answer because we are thinking that you probably have got more than one of these aspects of tag management or tag governance in place. So what aspects of tag governance are in place within your organization? Have you defined your global tag policy? Have you built and documented tag architecture? Have you put processes for monitoring tag policy in place? Maybe you've got ongoing testing and monitoring for data collection in place already, or maybe you're kind of behind on all of this, and maybe that's why you're with us today, because you want to find out how to get started. So think about that. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds while I remind everyone that we do have time built into the webinar today for some live Q&A. We've got a couple of questions coming in already, but if you've got a question, please go ahead and submit it, and Brad and Lucas are going to be happy to answer them when they get to the end of their formal presentations. So at this point, I know Brad is going to come on to the presentation and start with his remarks. So Brad, let's take a look at what the answers are in terms of our second poll question that the audience could choose from. So it looks like, we've got half the audience saying that they don't have anything in place yet, and that's probably why they're joining us here today. So what are these typical results that you see when you're out educating marketers?
Yes, thank you, Karen. I'm sure everybody in the audience is chuckling like we are here. This is not surprising. Everybody out there, feel good, you're not alone. We have these conversations 10, 15 times a day of, just folks that, organizations that just haven't fully thought about, fully understood, fully prioritized their tag governance strategy and kind of where they're at. Nice to see that, some folks have made some traction and progress, but hopefully by the end of today, you guys understand those common concerns that organizations are facing. In addition, how we can help you sell your organization, because tag governance is going nowhere. As Lucas mentioned, it's only going to become more and more. It's in Europe now, but it's coming to the U.S. So, please enjoy the ride with us today, and we look forward to helping down the road.
All right, great. So let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, so with that, I'm going to recap Lucas. We've really gone from simplicity to where an average site had less than 13 tags in 2014 to where for us it's not crazy to see 100+ tags floating on a site. The advancements of digital media and data tracking have created amazing opportunities for all of us to reach our customers. However, those same advancements have added a ton of complexity and issues across multiple teams, whether it's a media team, IT, compliance. We see these challenges every day, issues like unauthorized tags being on sites, remarketing and checkout tags breaking or not working, data accuracy issues, site performance challenges. Unfortunately, despite all of these challenges, we still see struggles in getting support in a tag auditing monitoring solution, which kind of goes back to that survey. It makes sense when you see that 50% plus feel like they haven't even started on it. So in the next section, we wanted to share 5 of the most common concerns we hear from new partners across the globe and discuss ways that we've kind of helped change the conversation with leadership. So the first concern is we have no idea what platforms are loading on our site, let alone, frankly, any documentation or governance strategy. The survey just proved that, and I'm sure some of us are kind of smiling right now because it's realistic in the marketplace today to hear that. And we see organizations at times, they have a general idea of the most common tags that are found on the site. They know whether they have GA or Adobe, but they also feel like they have an estimate of the number of tags on our site. When realistically, when we are working with organizations, what we see is typically there's many third-party tags that are piggybacking that the organization was not aware of, and the actual number of tags that are sitting on a site is double or triple those start estimates. So speaking of third-party tags, let's go to the next concern. We probably have unauthorized third-party tags that are piggybacking and violating GDPR. Along the same lines, we hear, around data privacy, GDPR is important, but it doesn't have that same level of urgency for every company. We hear a lot, hey, we're in the U.S., we have nothing to worry about, but all signs are pointing towards these same regulations and e-privacy. It's coming, and companies are finally realizing that, wow, we need to do something about this. We need to get ahead of it and make sure we have a proper tag governance strategy for our company. Another concern, if something breaks on our site, we find out too late, it really impacts the data collection we use to make business decisions. Put an example here of a remarketing tag that drops off. That's a common thing that happens. But coming from my background, I was heavily involved in media, and I remember getting the phone call of an agency or a partner that is completely freaking out. They're getting ready to go into a very big meeting. They're pulling the number, that final slide of the presentation, and what do you know? There's a big difference between what they're getting ready to present and what's showing up in their CRM, their actual data. So even if there are resources at an organization, a lot of times the priority is moved to other business-driving projects and not necessarily on tag governance. Which leads me to another concern that we hear is our CRM is not matching up with Google or Adobe Analytics reporting. I put 20% here is a lot of times that average number that we hear, but it happens all too often before these presentations that I mentioned. And at the point where you're getting ready to present to your team or your leadership and kind of sell this in, you end up spending your time explaining why the numbers are off, how you're going to fix it, and how it will be avoided in the future. So something like a tag auditing monitoring platform, again, is where this comes in as a use case. And finally, the fifth concern, and Lucas touched on this a little bit, is how are tags impacting the performance of your site? With the rise of tags, customers really want to understand how those tags are affecting their performance, because ultimately that's the value of a customer and the sales that you're bringing in. So we shared 5 common concerns that we hear about across the globe regarding tag governance. These are all legit concerns, but unfortunately they're often ignored and deprioritized by leadership. We wanted to outline the 5 main reasons we see companies failing at tag governance, which in our view is also the same as why is tag governance being deprioritized. The first one is lack of buy-in and prioritization. Tag governance is not a priority typically until there's a major issue resulting. So we've had conversations where, hey, I just spoke with my compliance and legal team and they're doing an audit. And I need this, I need a tag auditing monitoring tool because I don't want to fail against that audit. Or, hey, we lost half of our users or our consumers in our holiday time frame because something broke and we didn't know about it until afterwards. The second one is no central management or ownership. A lot of times this becomes a complex process from a leadership, which is why it's deprioritized, is you guys have many teams that are all touching your tag management system, and each individual group has their different priorities. So without that, it almost becomes a wild goose chase to find out who each tag owner is and how do you make those modifications. Poor guidance. Many teams working, we're all working with tons of partners and tons of different vendors, and typically the team is isolated in their own requirements. So that results to each individual team working on their own initiatives, and there's no cohesive plan, which is why tag governance is so important, is to make sure that the entire organization is on the same page as, I need to implement a new tag, I need to add a new tag on our site. You want to make sure that governance is shared across the organization. The fourth is it kind of bundles up the rest of the 3, but it's just starting on the wrong foot. If you start off where you have 4 different teams that are all operating on their own end and they're all trying to do their own initiatives, it's going to create a lot of tension. It's going to cause the organization to go in circles, and nothing's going to happen because it's going to continue to be deprioritized, and everybody's going to end up fighting and creating that tension against one another versus coming together and understanding what's best for the company. And then the 5th and final is the knowledge gap, and this is something we see a lot, but it's unrealistic for members of the legal team to understand why the media team needs this remarketing platform and why they need to add these tags, and it's the same vice versa. So it's really bringing all those teams together to understanding across the board what's important, how you go there. So these reasons, I'm sure all of you could relate to at least one of them. They can be overwhelming. We've actually helped countless companies really change the conversation. So in the next couple of slides, we wanted to talk through 4 key points of things that can help you sell in a tag auditing monitoring platform as soon as you get back to your desk or next week when you're talking with your leadership team, how you can make this a priority. The first is GDPR. This is no surprise. I'm sure a lot of you are tired of hearing about GDPR, but I don't know if you saw, it was from Apple CEO Tim Cook when he was speaking in Europe, but he quoted, "We at Apple are in full support of a comprehensive federal privacy law in the United States." So even if you think your organization right now has no concerns with the current policies, you're only based in the U.S., you have no traffic coming from other countries, it's going to come, and we strongly believe there's going to be more and more e-privacy regulations that are going to come to the U.S. And to really keep your organization at a competitive advantage and make sure that you are ready when it comes, really now is the time to start. Site performance we touched on a bunch, but as you think about leadership, the reason there's all these site performance companies and organizations out there at a high level is because they realize that path to purchase is extremely important. So any lag time, any seconds that you're losing out on the customer, you're losing out on highly valuable sales. So using a tag auditing monitoring platform to understand how tags specifically are impacting the performance of your site is a really big deal. Third is ownership, reducing the chaos. If you're going to go to your leadership team and present an opportunity of why a tag auditing monitoring solution is going to work and how it's going to work and help save the organization time and money, you need to do it in a very concise way. If you try to make it complex, bring in all different teams, you want to make sure you get your ducks in a row prior to that conversation to say we have ownership. This is a kind of a one-stop shop for our tag governance, and we have everybody aligned to it. Which really leads into more of the buzzword right now is data-driven marketing. There's all types of media platforms, all types of tools, partners, vendors that you can do to run some really exciting customer targeting and remarketing and to follow your consumers that can help effectively drive your business. The reality is, though, if you don't have your tag governance strategy set up and you don't have the right rules and validations that your organization needs to follow, it's going to be very hard to actually have good data to go off of and make those business decisions. So with that, now that you're at the point where, okay, you have a solid foundation of why this is important, why it's crucial, how to overcome those concerns internally, we want to help you change the conversation and now identify the right partners. So once you're at that point where, all right, for 2019, we're ready to choose a tag auditing monitoring platform, what are some areas in the 3 use cases that Lucas mentioned to go there? So before we get there and talk about those items, I think the most important first step that we push partners and new organizations that we're working with is what's the why? Why are you considering a tag auditing monitoring platform? In any vendor conversation, you should be clear and concise on what you're trying to solve and make sure all of your expectations are met. So there's a little bit of homework on your end before you start to talk with different vendors is you want to understand what are the 3 or 4 use cases or business cases that you're trying to solve and why you need a tag auditing monitoring platform. The first most common use case across these thousands of sites where we use Tag Inspector is compliance and privacy. In order to build that solid tag governance strategy, you have to understand what tags are on your site. If there's 100 plus, I'm guessing that there's many unauthorized third-party tags on your site. So understanding that, making sure you're removing those unauthorized tags and building that strategy. 2 is data collection and validation. This is really, as I mentioned, the remarketing tags dropping off, or my checkout tag, I wasn't aware. This is a crucial piece to make business decisions. If you're not collecting the data correctly and specific tags are breaking and you're not finding out until a couple weeks later, it can cause many issues throughout your organization, no matter what department you work in. And the final is performance marketing is our third probably most common use case working with partners is understand the performance of your site is going to help you understand how important it is from all the tags in your site. How do you clean that up to make your site more efficient? Let's talk about a few areas for you guys to think about when you're looking to implement a tag auditing monitoring solution. Within compliance and privacy, the ability to test all user conditions. Every organization we speak to is at a very different stage, and we saw that in the survey earlier today. Some have started, some are very advanced and have specific teams focused on compliance strategy, but transparently, many are not even thinking about it. One consideration for you guys to think about is there an ability with the vendor to test all user conditions? You want to be able to test consumers who have given consent, who have not given consent, and you want to have that ability to clear cookies from every single page to truly audit and evaluate your tags. By having the ability, for example, to clear cookies on every page, you're able to see the areas where where the conditional piggybacking is occurring, which is a major challenge that we see in the tag space. So I know at Tag Inspector specifically, we do have a real-time monitoring tool that actually allows you to collect data on every single consumer and understand all conditions. So it's not a bunch of different scans, it's understanding all conditions. Are they coming from desktop? Are they coming from mobile? Is it in the morning? Is it in the evening? We all know, tags aren't the most reliable items. You want to make sure that you're testing all the different conditions that those users can come in from. Rules and validations is another important one to dig into. So when you're choosing a tag monitoring and auditing platform, you should be asking questions about the ability to whitelist or blacklist a set of tags. So when you set up rules and validations that really maintain that compliant environment that you set up to prevent any third-party tags from being added on your site. It's critical to you to stay compliant, and it's going to allow your organization to save a significant amount of time and resources when you have that upfront set and to understand what specific requests you're looking to automate. Our number one use case, to give you an example, is creating a whitelist rule list of all platforms outlined in your privacy notice that are allowed, and to make sure that your organization is flagged if anything that is not listed is showing up or ends up being added to your site. And the third around compliance and privacy is, what is that advanced functionality? What is that advanced functionality that I would call makes the product even sexier, that is going to get your leadership even more excited about adopting a tag auditing monitoring platform? So a couple of these items that come up a lot as we work with partners is the ability to run your scans from just different locations. So if you're a global organization, you want to make sure that you can run a simulated scan of understanding what tags are on your site, how they're firing. You want to make sure you can run that from Europe. You also want to make sure you can run that from the United States and also run that from other locations where your business exists. The scheduling of scans. So even though scans are at a single point of time, do you have the ability to automate that process? Can you do it daily, weekly, monthly? If you're a global organization that has 200 plus sites, something that comes up a lot, what type of reporting can be shared? Your team has limited resources, so can the vendor put together global compliance reporting that can share a global summarized report to your team that saves you a ton of time and prevents you from running a bunch of different individual scans and having you to piece everything together? And finally, it's an API. Every organization we talk to has a lot of different platforms that they log into. We don't want to make, you don't want your vendor to be another platform that your team has to remember and to log into. So is there access to an API that you guys can take advantage of? Moving on to data collection and validation, which is the second use case that we shared earlier, is naturally data collection. You guys know how important it is. And a few items that you should be asking the vendor or partner that you're thinking about is understanding what tags are loading on your site, and will that vendor be able to provide data from all user conditions? So you want to make sure you understand all user conditions as those tags are loading, because it's such a dynamic and fluid environment. What specific data points will you have access to within the tool? Is the solution collecting from the data layer, or is it limited by tag request? Is data collection in the live environment? Is it simulations? In other words, are you getting data on a scan that ran at 10 a.m. on Monday? Or can you understand all the data that came from your past 500 customers that visited your site? Finally, how large is your vendor's tag library? There's a lot of tags. Weekly, we are adding tags to our library, but you want to understand, does the partner or vendor have a large amount of tags to make sure that all the tags that you're using, you're implementing, are going to be tracked and followed within data collection? Alerting system, again, another one, big topic, is most teams have limited resources. They can't sit there and spend all their time running a bunch of different simulations, checking what tags are on their site. So be asking the question, do you, vendor, have a alerting system? If a specific condition happens that we want to know about, are you being automatically alerted via email or some other source? Are there rules and validations that you can help set up? And what specific data will be collected? And especially for an e-commerce site, at a checkout page, can you be notified? If something breaks in your checkout page, that is a huge, huge issue, especially in key times like the holidays coming up. You want to make sure that you're notified very quickly, understand how quickly you can be notified, and how quickly the vendor or partner can help you consult and understand how to fix it quickly. Frequency and process is the last one, or collection and validation. Is we can all agree that tags, they're not the most reliable not the most reliable thing out there, especially during the tag setup and implementation. And the benefit of implementing this tag auditing platform is really understanding how frequently does the vendor collect the data, what does the process look for the team to actually use the system. A lot of teams we work with have very small, nimble teams, and they have 100 other priorities. So you want to truly understand the product, and you want to make sure it's simplified enough and you're getting the data that you need. Can you test and validate daily? What about hourly? Depending on your business, what vertical you play in, are you heavy e-commerce, are you not heavy e-commerce, you're going to need a different time frame. Some organizations we work with have that, they only need it quarterly. But some organizations, they want to know on an hourly basis because that's how important their online business is to them. Do the validations meet your specific use cases? So again, you want to understand the process and understand those business use cases, and do they have validations and rules that can meet those requirements? Another big one is technical expertise. Does the vendor you're working with have the true technical expertise? Do they really understand everything in and out of a tag management system and tag auditing and tag data collection? And can they help you and help consult your team for going about that? Especially if you have a junior level person on your team that's going to be running this space, you want to make sure that they can pick up the phone and ask for that guidance. And then finally, what is the process for monitoring? Can you specify all the tag requirements within the rule engine itself? And finally, performance marketing, some considerations around site speed. Again, we talked about this a bunch. But again, site speed is something in the performance area that you want to make sure that the tool that you're using, it's not just for compliance and privacy, it's not just for data collection and validation, but why not use it to help understand the performance of these tags in your site and how can you improve that, which is only going to help business. And the final one on performance is just individual tags and metrics. So there's, partners out there can have very different levels of what's provided from a tag latency and different KPIs or metrics within tag performance. So make sure you're asking the question is, what type of tag latency reports are you getting? How granular can you get with each individual tag? And understand that and see if it will be of value and benefit for you. So that wraps up our 3 main use cases, but there's a couple other considerations that I think are very important as you guys think about taking that next step in a tag auditing and monitoring tool. One is expertise. We've touched on this a bit, but the questions that you should be asking is, does this vendor have experience in my vertical? If I'm a large multi-brand global organization, you probably want to work with a vendor that has experience with large multi-brand global organizations. One thing that's really important in our business as we work with our partners is having those best practices, learning from mistakes that other companies have faced, and being able to share that very easily up front during the setup phase, during the implementation phase. You don't need to go through the same pain as maybe an early adopter went through. So understand that both the expertise from a best practices standpoint, from a vertical standpoint, and then really from a technical standpoint. Make sure you're inviting your technical teams. Make sure you're doing these technical demos so you can get very specific and very granular of understanding, is this the right fit for what we're looking to solve? Second one is consulting, is understand that consulting, do they have folks that you can get hour packages, so like ongoing monthly consulting that can help your business. Third is a trial. Do they offer a free trial? I know a tag inspector for partners that we will offer a POC to help them understand and see the value in our particular tool. And finally, price. That's not surprising to anybody, but the reason we're talking through all these very specifics is it's not just about price, guys. There's a lot of technical things and specific use cases that make sense for your business. So price is important, but make sure first that it's answering the use case that you have for your company. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Lucas to round us out with the implementation process and some tips and tricks for you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. So at this point where we stand, obviously we went through a little bit of the history of the overall tag management space, how everything has grown to the complexities and just the chaos, honestly, that a lot of sites find themselves in today. We talked a little bit about tag governance, why it's important, all the different considerations that go into it, exactly what the tag governance policy means, some of the different recommendations around getting organizational buy-in to address tag governance, implement a policy, and then how exactly to select a partner and things to look at to make sure that you have the right tools and you have the right support in order to be able to first define your tag governance policy as well as really manage that and monitor it on an ongoing basis. So at this point, what I want to do is just be able to share some of the insights and best practices really that we figured out working with thousands of websites, many of the largest global organizations in the world. So when it comes to implementing a tag monitoring tool and really a tag governance policy in general, one of the areas where failures occur, as Brad had mentioned before, is really starting off on the wrong foot. And a few different things go into that. One, not understanding the organizational issues and the organizational goals when it comes to any type of a tag management or a tag implementation project. So where you really need to start is a full site audit. And this isn't just a technical audit. This is also a business audit. Understand the goals, understand who the different key players are within the organization and who's going to be involved with the audit, and then getting into the technical pieces. So understanding, what is it that you're going to be monitoring? What is it that you're going to be testing? What are the standards and what are the requirements that you have as an organization? Also, what is in place today? What technologies are present? How are things loading? Where are all the different technologies? What data is being collected by what? And all of that really goes into informing that overall tag governance policy. Now, for all of this, the business piece as well as the tag audit piece can be, a tag monitoring platform can be extremely helpful and valuable as you're going through that tag audit in order to most efficiently collect the different data points that you're going to need. So make sure that whatever monitoring tool, whatever governance tool you're selecting can also help significantly with that audit process. Number two, and this is outside of the monitoring and the governance platform a little bit, but it's extremely important to define ownership as well as gather up documentation for all of the different platforms that are listed and defined within your overall tag governance policies. Without ownership, you don't know who to go to understand the requirements, what data points need to be collected, what are the standards when it comes to performance of a particular tag. If you have an issue and you identify unauthorized tags that are piggybacking or loading through a vendor, who can you go to internally or with your different agency or media partners in order to be able to rectify that issue? So ownership, define it, it's extremely important, document it, and then have documentation for all of the different platforms, making sure that, yes, it is approved under GDPR for legal. What are the different considerations and implementation specifics that are required for these different tags? Have all of that, put it in, and make it a part of that overall tag governance policy, and then really use that as the basis for what is going to be monitored, what is going to be tested on an ongoing basis. Number three is the tag architecture. So at this stage, once you've gone through an audit, you understand the business requirements, you have ownership of the different platforms, you have the documentation, now you really understand everything that's going to be allowed, not allowed, and required to be happening on your website. At this point is where that architecture comes into play. So first you need to write it all out. Figure out what is the data collection apparatus. Are we using a data layer, which I hope you are, in coupling that with your tag management system? What are the requirements? How should that be structured? How do we optimize the deployment of the tags on our website to minimize any type of performance risk? Those are the types of things that go into that overall tag architecture, and that is the documentation of that is what is going to then provide the basis for your ongoing testing and monitoring plan. So once you have the architecture set up, then we get into the actual implementation and QA. Now, one really big call out when it comes to a tag monitoring tool, tag monitoring testing in general. In between the tag architecture and the implementation phase is where you should be setting up any type of ongoing validations, rules, tests within your tag monitoring platform. Once you have the architecture documented, you have your requirements. You know what should be happening. Really creating all of the different rules, the validations, the tests at that stage allows you to then use those and incorporate those in that implementation and QA phase. So I know internally a lot of our developers and engineers like to use red-green refactor process for implementations. So they can create the validations within the tag monitoring and tag auditing tool that says what tags should be firing, what shouldn't be firing, what data should be collected. And it's those tests, those validations, they're going to fail until everything is set up and implemented properly. So it allows them to just automate that QA process, really simplify the testing process before the overall tag architecture and everything even gets to the production environment. So implementation in QA, leverage the tag monitoring tool in that, simplify that process, save yourself, save your team some time. Following the actual implementation in QA, setup, configuration of all the tags, that's when we get into that ongoing monitoring. And this is where Brad touched on it. A lot of the differences between different tag auditing and monitoring tools out there is how that ongoing monitoring is handled. Is it comprehensive? Is it proactive? Are you able to understand any type of issue with your tags, be it non-compliance, be it data collection issues, be it performance issues? How quickly are you able to learn of those different issues? Are you able to understand problems with the overall tag behavior or violations of your tag governance policy across all conditions, under all different scenarios? That's something to really look at and leverage with your tag monitoring tool. Again, hopefully you can automate it as much as possible. Let your teams fix issues and optimize overall deployment as opposed to sitting there and having to be reactive and just dealing with problems as they arise. So those are some tips and tricks at each stage, really, of the overall tag governance implementation process. The final thing that you definitely want to keep in mind is make sure that you are defining what success looks like and you are tracking quantifiable success within the overall tag governance process. So one of the things that Brad had mentioned before is difficulties for a lot of organizations getting leadership buy-in to focus on the tags. Everyone likes to talk about the analytics reports and how they can use the data and predictive modeling, but everyone loses sight of the underlying architecture that allows all of those things to be possible, and that's the tags. So couple in the different tagging initiatives with those larger business processes. We've talked a lot today about the three different kind of verticals within the tag governance area. So data collection and validation, define what success looks like. 95%, 97% data collection and reducing discrepancies to less than 5% between my analytics platform and my back-end system. Understand in the audit, where are you today? And then in implementing some type of a tool and ongoing monitoring, how are you able to reduce that? How quickly are you able to get to that goal? Compliance and privacy. We have had clients in the past leveraging the Tag Inspector tool just by going through and doing that tag audit phase and then defining what was in use versus what was not in use. Reduce between 20 and 40% of the tags that are loading on their website. One, reducing any type of compliance risk, and two, also aiding in the third piece here for performance, optimization of the tag architecture, removing of any tags that are potentially negatively affecting user experience, as well as those things that are not necessary to be loading, and really defining all of those things within that tag governance process, leveraging the monitoring tool in order to stay on top of that, able to reduce page load speeds, in some cases up to half. And that's just due to optimization of tag management. So define what the goal is, define why it is that you are wanting to implement some type of a tool, set those success parameters, and then track and quantify the success in order to be able to justify the ROI and the improvement as a part of overall larger business initiatives. So, in summary, now that hopefully you have a much better understanding of tag governance, tag auditing, monitoring platforms, what it is that you need to look for, how it is that you're going to be able to implement these things, ask yourself, how confident are you in your organization's data governance strategy? With that, we will happily turn this over to a few Q&As and be able to answer anything. Hopefully that was in here. So feel free to drop questions in the QA box over on the side.
Thank you, Lucas. I'm here. I can pick it up from there now.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Brad. Great information, a lot of information, audience. We do have a few minutes for some Q&A, and we've got some great questions coming in, so keep them coming. We're going to start passing them right along to Lucas and Brad to answer. So let's get started since we're short on time. All right, here's the question. What specific characteristics are helpful to make note of with tags? Do these factor into how they should be named? Do you have recommendations around naming systems or taxonomy? So a couple of questions there, but sort of all related in terms of how you set this up to even think about some tag governance issues. Lucas, you want to start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the key specific characteristics to make note of and make sure you have documented when it comes to a governance policy. Obviously what the platform is, what it's doing, what data is being collected, and then how it's working. So if we think about those three main areas that we've really touched on, compliance and privacy, what data is being collected, how is it being used, tracing that, making sure that it is compliant within your legal parameters at your organization, making sure that's compliance under GDPR, all of those types of items. That's where that comes in. So understand that, document that. Second, what data is being collected? What is the mechanism for doing that? That's where that data collection piece comes in. How does that tag play into the overall requirements for the overall tag architecture? And then third, for performance, really understanding what is the size of a tag, some of the technical specifics around like the size of the overall configuration file that needs to be downloaded, average latency of that whole request process, as well as the total number of requests that are being sent. Those are really the three key performance metrics. But every tag should go under some sort of a performance review, legal review, as well as a security review. Just making sure all of that is checked off, I guess, within the governance policy as a part of the implementation and review process. And then as far as nomenclature goes, as long as it's clear within the tag management system what a tag is, that's really what we recommend. What a tag is, and then also an easy understanding of where it is on the website. If you have inconsistent naming and taxonomy, that's where you run into issues, because there will be a tag that was in use for one campaign 3 years ago that'll still be running just because no one knows what it is, no one has any reason to question it. So making sure that you're using just clear, consistent naming, it can be pretty flexible for your organization, but that's really the key there.
All right, Brad, did you want to jump in, or should we move on to the next one?
I think you're good to move on, Karen.
All right, great. Let's try and get to one or two more here. And Brad, maybe you want to start with this one. For a definition of success, what are some best practices for tying it back to revenue? That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that Lucas hit on towards the end. I think as you have that governance and policy, what we see a lot of organizations happen is they'll be able to sell in the tag auditing monitoring platform, but then they'll kind of forget about the ongoing understanding of how this is saving not only resources and time. So as we think about across those different use cases, it could be simple things of around, hey, by removing 50 of our 180 tags that were either unauthorized or were 3 years old, as Lucas just mentioned, that was able to cut our site time or make a consumer from coming onto our site to making it to purchase in half, which resulted in X amount of sales. That's just one example around site speed. From a data collection standpoint, it's really around how do you track uptime. I think any leadership team understands that if the back-end analytics aren't set up correctly and something breaks, that can have a very large impact on an organization. Think about audiences that you're building to remarket to your customers who have visited your site. If you have a site or a tag that's down for 2 weeks, and you're literally, let's say you have thousands upon thousands of customers going to your sites for, daily, you're missing out on tens of thousands of customers that you can, potential customers that were going to spend a lot of money with you because you don't have that audience being built because something broke. So there's just 2 specific examples. I would say there's a handful of examples of how we've seen both stakeholders that are owning this tag auditing monitoring space, how they've kind of showcased that at the end of the year to say, look, this is why we have tag auditing monitoring. The final one that I would mention on is just with GDPR, the e-privacy, all of the compliance, the fact that GDPR, you will be fined if you have unauthorized tags that are collecting information on your users that, off of your site. So there's several use cases, but those are just a couple examples to name a few.
All right, let's try and squeeze one more in here because this is a good one. It really kind of gets to the heart of what you guys presented today. Lucas, I think you're probably the best person to start on this. Is the real benefit of having a tag monitoring platform the alerts in case something goes awry? Couldn't you manually audit the amount of tags and any piggybacks you have to figure out which ones you do and don't need through something like Google Tag Management? So maybe you want to speak to that, Lucas?
Yeah, so there's a couple different parts here. So the first piece would be the question about the audit. Can you manually audit the amount of tags and any piggybacks that you have through GTM? So when we refer to piggybacking of tags, it's third parties that are loading through another. So the behavior can be, if you think about it in the context of GTM, that Facebook pixel that you have loading within GTM is basically piggybacking off of GTM. It's not something that's implemented directly on the website. It is embedded within the configuration code that GTM is loading in. That's happening on other platforms, other tags that are loading on a website. So tags that are loading are injecting other tags that are then also loading. So no, you don't have that visibility. You might be able to see like the individual network requests being sent by a tag, but you would have to know exactly the classification and exactly what platform it is that those different domains and network requests are associated with. To give you an idea, Tag Inspector, our library for classification has around 2,500 unique platforms classified. So that would be quite the knowledge base of an individual team to be able to, one, identify those things and then know exactly what those platforms are, as well as to trace it back to the source, which is digging through a lot of JavaScript. So no, the value of a tag auditing and a monitoring platform is to give you that visibility in an easy way. But then also, yes, obviously the benefits of that ongoing monitoring and that alerting. There's no team that I've come across has the capacity to manually go through and test even really critical aspects of a website. Think about a major e-commerce site. If you have a couple of different checkout experiences, I'm not familiar with a single organization that has people going through and testing each of those on a continuous basis throughout every single day. And that's what a tag auditing platform allows you to really do, and a monitoring platform allows you to do, is have that comprehensive ongoing monitoring for data collection there.
And I would add on to that, it's similar to the example I brought up earlier is, let's say your team on Monday mornings, they go in and they check every, particular tag at 9 a.m. Well, that process is good. And at 9 a.m. on Monday, yes, everything looks good. But if something breaks on Tuesday and you come back in the office that next Monday and something's break, there you have, many days of your business that you've not only missed out on audiences, but you've probably missed out on a lot of sales.
All right. Well, thank you both. Unfortunately, audience, that is all the time we have today. So Thank you again to Lucas and Brad for a very informative and timely presentation. And thank you, audience, for your great questions there. We had a couple that we didn't get to, but don't worry. We're going to pass everyone's questions along to the folks at Tag Inspector and InfoTrust for some follow-up. I want to thank our sponsor, InfoTrust, and their product, Tag Inspector, which you can learn more about, as you see here, at www.taginspector.com. That's all for our broadcast today. We look forward to seeing you next time, right here